Hey guys, welcome back to another rapid update where we discuss developments that impact access to newer healthcare technologies. In these videos, we only cover resources that are in the public domain. So in this video, I want to talk about a report that was published in April this year by the Cancer Alliance in South Africa, talking about access to cancer medicines. It's a interesting report in the sense that it covers a couple of major themes, mostly related to tenders that were issued by the National Department of Health and non-bids and non-awards, and the reasons for those. And then the second component of the report talks about the pricing and alternative pricing approaches within the South African market to increase access to cancer therapies, both in the public sector and private sector. But it's a lengthy document, 168 pages. This would not be a rapid update if I went through all 168 pages. Well, what I prefer to do rather is focus on the most important tangible pieces that I hope you as a listener conveys the key messages arising from this work. So the first couple of pages start with a forward. So this is Fatima Hassan from the Health Justice Initiative in Cape Town, and she highlights the crisis in access to pharmaceutical treatments in cancer in South Africa. That it is partly related to the limitations of the current healthcare system because it's been hollowed out by local state institutions due to poor planning, incapacity, and also corruption. And what this does inevitably is these activities divert resources away from the public funds that are allocated for purchasing of newer healthcare technologies and making them available within the state sector. And then she also mentions here that the public and private healthcare sectors, policymakers, medical schemes administrators, and drug company executives are failing patients with cancer in South Africa. And the rest of the document certainly has very strong and pointed language to each of the stakeholders that are mentioned over here, and recommend a set of actions to address the disparities that exist between public sector and private sector. I'll get to those recommendations in just a few moments' time, and then also reflect on the viability of implementing some of them. Others are certainly something that could be achieved in the very short term. Others are somewhat unachievable, but we'll talk about those. The next section just highlights the primary purpose of the report, which seeks to highlight existing problems around access to cancer medicines throughout the supply chain, and offers a couple of recommendations at the end of the report, as I've already mentioned. The portion related to here, the non-awards and unawarded medicines in tenders related to these. So these were the reasons for non-awards, ranging from late bids, non-adherence to bidding requirements, poor performance by pharmaceutical companies, financially unviable tender prices and quantities for companies, delayed payments by government, and manufacturing problems with shortages of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So most of these issues here relate to operational components of how government runs tenders. And then also it relates to the willingness of private sector participants and their willingness to submit a bid in the face of many of these problems at the level of the government. So that is a point to consider in the future. And then on the section under pricing in the private sector, the report brings up the international benchmarking as a potential tool to assist in referencing of medicine prices within the South African market compared to international markets. And then looking at obtaining the actual cost of production for some of the pharmaceuticals. Now, I know for certain that based on international experience in other markets, obtaining the cost of production will be near to impossible. That's certainly not a viable policy objective. But what has worked quite well in many jurisdictions is international benchmarking of medicine prices, which is what is brought up here towards the end of this section, page 25. I strongly recommend that you download a copy of the report and read it from beginning to end when you have some available time, and just reflect on the current recommendations that are provided. But here they mention that WHO published 10 pricing policy guidelines, external reference pricing, which I just mentioned. International benchmarking of medicine prices is something that works pretty well. In a recent video published on Rapid Updates, reviewed the utilization of different pricing approaches for biosimilars in Europe. So you may wish to have a look at that video and see the extent to which this tool results in significant price savings within a defined geographical territory, depending on the group of countries that you choose, of course. Internal referencing of medicine prices benchmarked against prices with the same or similar medicinal value, and then a value-based pricing. And I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area over here. However, this seems to be a menu of different policy options, because value-based pricing is mentioned here at the top, and the diametrical opposite of this is cost-plus pricing. This policy objective, as I mentioned, is unlikely to succeed, and it certainly hasn't succeeded in most countries around the world. I think the more viable option is to utilize as a centerpiece good science to determine the cost effectiveness, not only as a criteria, but amongst several other criteria, what the value of a newer healthcare technology presents within the market, and then pegging the price associated with that value. Well, what this suggests is a method of differential pricing across countries, which is not it's not out of the purview of pharmaceutical companies. There are certainly some that pursue the strategy of segmenting pricing based on the gross domestic product per capita of a country, and recommending a differential pricing strategy, as I've just mentioned. Other suggestions that were provided in the report: price transparency, tendering and negotiation, pool procurement, which seems to be a perennial theme in sub-Saharan Africa. We worked on a project a number of years ago to develop a pool procurement strategy for SADC countries. We're really not sure to what extent those have been progressed further down the line. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done here. Many countries have already utilized this pool procurement approach. Caribbean countries, for instance, Middle Eastern countries collaborating through the Gulf Cooperation Council to harmonize pricing across different jurisdictions. Other examples includes NUPCO in Saudi Arabia for a pool procurement of the public sector medicines and technologies that are used. So there are very good examples across the world on utilizing this approach, and this may be an opportunity in the future as well. And then tax exemptions, absolutely something that would need to be pursued in the future. It makes absolutely no sense adding a value-added tax on top of a medicine, particularly a life-saving medicine. So when we'd have to find ways of removing or reducing taxes on pharmaceutical products, not just pharmaceuticals, but here we're also talking about medical devices potentially. The next section of the report that relates to conclusions and recommendations. So one of the key aspects going forward is, given that South Africa is looking at a national health insurance system, is to what extent and what would the scope of cancer benefits look like under the NHI. There's still a lot of questions on this topic. The report mentions, there's brilliant policies, but they've failed in implementation. This is a concern vis-a-vis once national health insurance comes around. Will it still be plagued by the poor and suboptimal implementation of government policies? And then other recommendations are directed to specific stakeholders in the market. This is for the National Department of Health. So cancer registries are required, absolutely, in the sense of collecting epidemiological data, outcomes data, preferably also including costing data for the provision of care, and utilizing that as a central piece to inform policy making, not only for national health insurance, but then also for ensuring price parity between the public sector and the private sector, if that is deemed as an important objective. The next is Section 18A regarding bonusing under the Medicines and Related Substances Control Act to prohibit the supply or bonus or rebate system. So there is an exclusion for medical devices and IVDs. This Section A certainly applies to medicines. And it comes back to the conversation, or the point that I'll raise a little bit later on, is whether the single exit price legislation is still applicable within the South African environment, in the sense that is it facilitating access to newer healthcare technologies, or is it acting as a barrier? And does the single exit price articulate with any form of value-based pricing at all? And at the moment, it doesn't. So I think there's still some work there that needs to be done in this area. A question related to the feasibility of exempting expensive oncology and other specialty medicines in terms of Section 36. So I'm not really sure what the objective of Cancer Alliance was to do something like this, but this would exempt expensive oncology medicines and specialty medicines from the application of the entire Medicines Act, and depending on how that exemption is defined. So I think a greater clarity would be required here on precisely why would this exemption be required. Is it being utilized as a tool to improve access? If so, how? And then the other parts are directed to other stakeholders. So pooled procurement is mentioned over here again. This is specifically to SAPRA, the Medicines Regulatory Authority in South Africa, talking about Section 21 that is being used to expedite the access and the entry of a medicine into the market outside of the usual regulatory process. But the time that it takes to obtain Section 21 approval is really rapid and quick, which is good news for patients. So if it can be done under Section 21, potentially those same timelines or a little bit more could also be applied to the regular regulatory process. But as we know, there's a long backlog at the medicines regulator to address all new medicines that are entering the market. So some for the National Treasury, here's specifically for the pharmaceutical industry, about the pricing of cancer medicines in the whole of the SADC region, to urgently convene a meeting because there's currently no consensus on what fair pricing is, and I believe this will remain the status quo, because fair pricing or pricing is a relative concept. It certainly doesn't apply to one specific country, and it's very likely that if you do convene a meeting amongst a SADC group of countries, there will be differences in opinion, even within these small group of countries, when there are neighbors, but they are vastly different socioeconomic status and levels of productivity. So finding a consensus on fair pricing is really quite challenging, especially if it's not grounded in any scientific framework. Whereas value-based pricing clearly has a set of methodological guidelines or elements that guide the determination of how to ascertain what value is. The other recommendation for the industry was investigating different pricing strategies like pooled procurement to make medicines more affordable. So whilst I agree with the first component, and there's some very good examples from leading companies around the world that utilize differential pricing strategy based on GDP per capita and socioeconomic status across countries, it is unlikely that the pharmaceutical industry would participate in any form of pooled procurement strategy development. Remember here that pharmaceutical industry is a supplier of goods and services into the market. They're certainly not going to be influencing the demand through a pooled procurement strategy. So this would be more on the mandate of the National Department of Health or a patient organization to facilitate, or multilateral institutions as a potential alternative approach, and why this would potentially improve the efficiency within healthcare markets, the pooled procurement. So certainly a lot of work to be done in this area too going forward. For funders and medical schemes in South Africa, the Cancer Alliance mentions that out-of-pocket expenses for patients are increasing annually, forcing patients to access public services. Cancer benefit packages for patients need urgent revision to ensure that patients have access to cancer treatment. The other point that should be added to this as well is harmonization of cancer treatment options across medical schemes. Now, I know that the context of prescribed minimum benefits aims to do that, but in practice, it's not always the case that patients have the same access across medical schemes, particularly if you look at the duration of time from diagnosis to the time of initiating therapy. Those are vastly different between the type of medical scheme that you have and the benefit options too. And then the recommendation of adding a value-based care model to cancer treatment should be designed specifically in collaboration with managed care organizations. And there are many in South Africa with highly specialized skills to be able to do that. And this is also an area for a lot more work in the future. And that was it, I believe. So human rights approach, let's check the final one, and National Department of Health. So we've spoken about all the elements. All in all, just in conclusion, is the report is certainly an interesting and very useful resource, and great work to the Cancer Alliance in putting together something like this and investigating the key issues that impact access to medicines. However, some of the policy options are not feasible because they simply haven't worked in other international jurisdictions, and they serve as very interesting agenda items, but it's very unlikely that you'll seek any or find any consensus amongst the stakeholders on those. And there's other policy options that have been explored in other jurisdictions that have worked. Pooled procurement, for instance, differential pricing strategy, value-based pricing, which are all very tangible options with very good case studies in other international markets that could be applied in South Africa. What it requires, though, is a willing policymaker and regulator to step onto the scene and to add some meaningful contribution and leadership in this space. And what it also requires is that stakeholders with differing opinions convene a meeting. Yeah, absolutely, agree to meet, but they agree to collaborate within a certain within a defined framework. And perhaps the Cancer Alliance set of recommendations set up that initial framework for potential collaboration. I wouldn't recommend that only be left to the leadership of the National Department of Health. It would have to be a joint collaboration across the board and exploring some of these options over here. So anyway, final point is thanks so much for listening to the video. Please be sure to download a copy of this report, read through the recommendations as it pertains to access to cancer medicines in South Africa. Thanks so much for listening. Take care. Bye.